All right. Hello, everybody. This is Scott Nelson from the Austrian Economics Center in Vienna, Austria. And today, this morning, it's 11 o'clock in the morning, I have the pleasure of being with Nataliya Melnyk, who is director of the Bendukidze Free Market Center in Kiev, Ukraine. So, welcome, Natalia.
Hello, everyone.
So we're continuing on in the spirit of going online, taking the Free Market Roadshow online. We're continuing a little series where we talk to several of our partners, asking them essentially, what's the status in their respective countries? And so I know nothing about what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. So maybe Natalia, if you could just fill us in, what's the current state in your country? I mean, do you have any rough sort of numbers in terms of people infected, death count? I mean, what's going on here?
So I'll be happy to provide some numbers, but I do have a disclaimer to make that our testing capabilities are very limited. So the official numbers are pretty low. So, but those two are really connected. So as of this morning, we have 218 confirmed cases. So they are lab confirmed because express testing, which is more available, has proven to be pretty unreliable, at least the ones that we have in Ukraine. So lab confirmed 218 cases and five of them lethal. And we do have four successfully treated patients. So they are fortunately out right now. So, compared to the rest of the world, these numbers do seem pretty low, especially when, I'm going to start talking about the measures and restrictions that have been introduced. That will make them seem pretty extreme because, if you keep
Right.
those numbers in mind.
Well, and on that note, actually, what are some of the measures? Like, is the country right now in a full sort of lockdown? Is everyone basically staying in their homes? Are airport closed? Everything like that? What's that look like?
So when we're talking about what the authorities are doing, you can pretty much compare our measures and restrictions to the worst hit regions in Italy and China. So like compared to the other European countries, they're very extreme. So we are in full quarantine. Our borders are closed, including train and airline connections. And starting from this week, Ukrainians are not allowed to leave Ukraine either. So which is kind of a new, and a bit of an unexpected thing. So we are not allowed to travel for tourism purposes. So we are basically stuck here now, but of course, some exceptions are made for Ukrainians coming back from foreign countries. So they still have access to come back. And I think we are expecting maybe even 100,000 more, coming back one of these days.
Right.
So as for some other details, we've had it's so-called situation of emergency introduced. So unlike the state of emergency, the situation of emergency does not allow the authorities to violate our constitutional rights, but it gives them the possibility to consolidate the effort, to try to curb the outbreak. Because prior to this week, the state of emergency was introduced only in a couple of regions that were, the most influenced by the outbreak, but now it's covering the whole Ukraine. And so the movement within the country is very limited, basically only to your own private transportation.
Hmm.
So you can't take a train, bus, or whatever anywhere. And the police are introducing block posts on the way, on big freeways next to big cities to pull over drivers and, ask where they're going and why they're going somewhere. The same is supposed to be done in big cities too, like within the city limits, because they really want to encourage people to stay at home, and stop treating this as some kind of a holiday or vacation or whatever. And our public transportation is basically unavailable right now. So the underground is closed, buses, trams, trolley buses, only people with special tickets are allowed to take them. But of course, the routes are really limited. And those people with special tickets are their healthcare workers, law enforcement. So they're deemed like critically essential personnel. But even that is not enough. So unfortunately, a lot of essential people are experiencing difficulty getting to work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because very few of them have their own cars. So we do have a lot of volunteer organizations popping up, and like help the doctor get to work or something like that. So they're trying to cooperate, especially in Kiev, when we have a lot of people living in the suburbs or outside of Kiev, but they have to go back to the city to go to work. So this has been a struggle for a lot of people, because you're free to travel, or more or less free to travel, only if you have a car. So that's pretty much it. And yeah, they're talking about well, unexpectedly, this is coming from our Minister of Internal Affairs, who decided to suggest closing down all non-essential businesses. So,
Mm-hmm.
which would, basically influence all industries, because right now the service industry is the one that's hit the most, because cafes, restaurants, coffee shops, they had to close down.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, only if you're a grocery store or a drugstore or a store selling communication devices, or if you're a hospital, you can still remain working and operating. Other than that, it's very severely limited. But if we do have this law in place banning all non-essential entities from working, that's going to be a big problem. Yeah, so that's something they are talking about right now.
Okay, so they're talking about doing that. Have they started implementing anything in the way of, let's say, for example, tax deferrals for companies, or any sort of measures like, in some of the Nordic countries, in Denmark and Norway and Sweden, for example, we see the government jumping in to cover, a certain percentage of the workers' wages if they would otherwise have been laid off by the company. So as a way to kind of ease the pressure on companies. Is there anything similar to that going on in Ukraine?
So in Ukraine, we do have a very big welfare state component. It's very far-reaching, but we also have basically non-existent financial resources for it. So the idea is there. The idea, is being thrown around by different people in power to different extent. Either it's just for the retired people, or to help the people who are laid off or unemployed, whatever. Right now, it's just, they're talking about it, but what they have done, I can't even call this a tax holiday. It's more like a tax weekend with the way, in the form that it has been introduced, because it's in place only until the end of April. So
Mm-hmm.
unlike other countries who are going for a couple of months, for us it's a very limited time, and it's only in regards to waiving payments for the real estate tax and the land tax. So who are going to benefit from this? It's big companies.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, real estate owners who own pretty much elite real estate, because it's like 75 or 85 square meters plus.
Right.
So for smaller apartments, it's not relevant. So it's supposed to be both for, individuals and businesses, but most businesses, they tend to rent,
Hmm.
right? So they don't pay this land tax or real estate tax anyways. So the small and medium business enterprises, they won't feel the effect of this. And then they are waiving payments for the unified social contribution for private entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
And this unified social contribution, it's basically how our pensions fund gets money. So if these payments are waived for like 2 months, it doesn't make a big difference to private entrepreneurs, because the percentage is pretty low for this social contribution. But it, at the same time, it makes a hole in the pensions fund, which is
Right.
already not doing so well. Oh yeah, and for real estate and land tax payments, they go to local budgets. So basically, local budgets will be left without money, which they're supposed to use to fight the outbreak on the local level by financing healthcare institutions. So, it's a bit all over the place right now, but they have established, it's so-called, um, it's a new fund, uh, anti-coronavirus measures fund.
Right.
It's not the official name, but that's what it pretty much is. And in order to be able, like I said, we don't have financial reserves for anything. So in order to finance this stabilization fund, we are talking about the sequesterization of our budget, right? So it's gonna mostly influence um, the cultural, educational spheres, because they are going, like, the budget is going down 41%,
Mhm.
which is, we found out about it just a couple of days ago. So people are reacting badly to this. I mean, in any case, if you have budget cuts, you will have people unhappy about it. But if you think about it, if you're reducing the funding for education, including the education of healthcare specialists, and even education in general, with schools and universities closed down and suffering greatly because of this too. So yeah, some problems arise from this. And so that we understand more about the numbers, so this stabilization fund, it will receive 127 billion hryvnia, which is our local currency, which is almost $4.5 billion. So $4.5 billion, it's not very much money, but we do not know how they're going to spend it yet. So we'll see where it goes, but probably it will be used to give some extra money to the retired people to support
Mhm.
them a little bit. And we will see how much money will go to the unemployed people, because unfortunately, we do not really have the numbers yet.
Okay, fair enough. And you said, how long have you guys basically been in quarantine? I mean, how long has the situation of emergency been in place for?
So the general situation of emergency, it's new, so it's just from this week. As for locally, the whole quarantine thing was introduced middle of March.
Hmm.
And it was supposed to be over April 4th, but it has recently been extended to April 24th, which was honestly bad news for most businesses. But now they have a new thing to worry about. There's already a rumor about having it further extended until May 31st, one of the possible dates. So there are a lot of questions, honestly, because, you know, there are different types of quarantine. We're talking about different measures, different restrictions. Right now, they're different all over Ukraine because it's really dependent on the local authorities as well.
Okay.
But, you know, in the worst case scenario, if we do have all non-essential businesses shut down, then it's gonna, you know, it's gonna have a huge negative impact on the economy that had already been struggling even without the coronavirus factoring in.
You mentioned earlier healthcare and that sort of thing. And given that there's only been, 218 confirmed cases of people who have been infected, I mean, I don't know if it looks like that number is really, you know, what the growth rate looks like when it comes to infections at the moment. But is the health system, I mean, is it able to accommodate a lot more sick people, or how does that look?
So our healthcare in Ukraine, it's public, but it's in the process of being reformed. So the idea is to make it something like the NHS in the UK. But, you know, it's really early stages, and what's happening in the country is really halting the process of reforming. And it's basically halted the decentralization in the country, which is part, you know, of the whole funding of the healthcare reform. So it's still public, and not every hospital has to, well, is intended to deal with coronavirus patients, because we have special hospitals. They are called hospitals for infectious diseases. So that's where the patients are supposed to go. But that's only if, you know, if they suspect that they have coronavirus, right?
Right.
Because when it all started first, people treated this just like a cold or flu. So basically, they went to the nearest hospital, right? Or to the hospital that they're used to. So I think it's important to understand that doctors in general need to receive funding, need to receive medical supplies to be prepared. Because, you know, you can't isolate them from patients, even if they're not supposed to deal with these patients. And in order to show you how I believe unprepared our healthcare system is, so we have one of the regions, it's called Ternopil Oblast. So there we have 15 infected people. And out of these 15, 6 are doctors. So these are the people who most likely got it from, you know, patients they treated. And it only shows that they do not have the necessary medical supplies to protect themselves, and, you know, and stay safe from the disease. And now there are rumors about you know, this thing being introduced that if a doctor treated a coronavirus patient for a week, after this week, this doctor has to self-quarantine for 14 days.
Right.
Which will, you know, just think about it. We will run out of doctors pretty soon if that's the case. And we are nowhere close to the peak of the outbreak. So basically, right now, we are having this delayed preparation phase because we still have relatively very few cases, but our healthcare is already falling behind because we never had the medical supplies available. And just think about this. Beginning of March, we were still exporting face masks and respirators abroad. And then, so they were from our reserves from many years ago. And right now we're in the situation in which hospitals can't get their hands on those masks just to protect their employees who have to deal with, they're the front line of the defense. So yeah, of course we have a lot of motivated doctors. We have a lot of doctors who are willing to work tirelessly, and they don't even consider, um, taking a vacation and staying at home with their families or whatever. But in general, the system is not prepared for it. So right now we do have the number of beds we need, but let's remember the number of cases. So it's very easy to overwhelm our healthcare system.
Fair enough. And how are the people holding up? Like insofar as you have a sense of how people are doing. I mean, how are they reacting towards the quarantine measures, for example? Are they supportive of it? Are they afraid of the economic consequences?
So right now, when you go just outside, when you leave your apartment, you have this feeling of a long weekend. When you have like, let's say 4 days off. So during this time, most people, let's leave Kiev, right? They go somewhere else, they travel either in Ukraine or outside. So we have a lot fewer cars. The traffic is barely non-existent, but those people who stay in the city, they walk around. So you do see people outside. They mostly are in twos, right? So big groups are not that present right now, but you have this feeling that people are treating this as a holiday, because you can see them just hanging out together, drinking beer or whatever. And people are still learning what social distancing is. Some of them try to stay away, some of them don't, because in our culture we never had this personal space notion very present. So you can see people still learning. You can see 50% of people wearing masks if they can get their hands on it, but not very many know how to wear them properly, right? Because you're supposed to change them every 2 hours. You're not supposed to touch them with your hands. And then you see people constantly adjusting those masks, taking them on and off and everything like that. Yeah, so that's the way it is. So I wouldn't say that people are scared enough to sit at home for a while. We don't have a lot of stockpiling. So when you go to the store, you can still see everything on those shelves. The problem is that people like going to the stores every day, instead of buying maybe some more for a week or two and not having to go through these interactions the whole time. At the stores, everyone, all cashiers are wearing masks and gloves, and they're asking you to use cards for payments. They try to avoid dealing with cash. So you see these small things that are adjusting our lifestyle. And then as for being worried about the economic situation, it is a big deal, especially now since we found out that the quarantine has been extended, so people start getting the feeling that maybe these changes are longer lasting than they originally expected, and they may impact them more, because if we talk about the businesses who stopped working, most of them, they sent their employees away on unpaid leave. So unpaid leave is a bit easier on the businesses, but it's pretty heavy on the employed people, right? Because a lot of Ukrainians live paycheck to paycheck. So they don't have anything saved, or the savings are really limited, especially after the economic crisis we had in 2014 and 15. So, the impact was pretty severe. And recently there was this um, survey about like for how long you can use your savings in case if the quarantine is extended. 57% of people said that the savings they have is enough for less than 4 weeks. And when I'm saying less than 4 weeks, I mean that, like, for example, 7% said that their savings are enough for a couple of days only.
Right. Okay.
So we see that if the country itself does not have enough financial resources, we're also talking about individuals not having enough financial resources to go that long without income. So which is going to become a bigger problem once they realize that, okay, we have to be without work for even longer than we originally expected.
And given that sort of disconcerting picture that you've just kind of painted there, and some of the statistics that you offered, I mean, to pose the sort of question that obviously everyone is asking themselves and asking each other at the moment. I mean, in the case of Ukraine, how do you see things, going ahead, moving forward, when it comes to the health issues, when it comes to obviously economically, what's going to happen? I mean, do you have you want to venture any guesses or any sorts of predictions or things that we should keep an eye on at least?
Well, so right now, with the way things are, we do not have any information to start talking about, the number of laid off people or the number of bankruptcies whatsoever, because of this way out that the businesses found with unpaid leave and everything. But then we need to keep in mind that we already have businesses and educational institutions that employ up to 4 million people, non-operational, right? So even with the optimistic projections of 500,000 people laid off in the near future, and if this period is extended even further, we will be talking about many more than that. And definitely a lot of smaller and middle businesses will not survive this quarantine. That's a fact. So as for bigger businesses, it depends, right? It depends how long the quarantine is going to be, because even them, they will have to make some cuts and optimize their budgets. But we do have an interesting case of Vodafone Ukraine. So it's a big telecommunications company. They turned down the assistance package from the government, meaning the real estate and land tax offer for 2 months. They said, we can handle it, we don't need it, we're going to pay it the way we already intended to. But so far I know only about this one case. Other than that, the impact will be heavy. So our economists are projecting growth starting from 2021, and it's possible only the second quarter. So this year, they're expecting, in a quite optimistic scenario, I would say a 4% decrease in GDP.
Mm-hmm.
And if our measures will become more severe as to non-essential businesses, or if the quarantine is even extended past the original April 24th, well, now original April 24th date, the decrease can be 9% of GDP, which is huge. And more negatively thinking people are even talking about a similar drop to what happened in China so
Hmm.
which saw a 40% decrease in GDP, but it was January only, if I'm not mistaken. So with the absence of financial resources and the need to support um, both smaller sized businesses and taxpayers in general, um, honestly, and it pains to say it, but honestly, so far the only solution that everyone else sees, it's the IMF.
Mm.
So our economy has been heavily reliant on IMF for quite some time, but right now especially. So with the possible possible need for cash injections into the economy, they are both the decision makers and the economists are saying that we need the IMF, and we're already expecting an increased offer from the IMF of about $9.5 billion.
Hmm.
It's in two programs. One of the programs is the one aimed at helping with the coronavirus situation, but there are conditions for these programs, and so far we don't see the political will to introduce these two conditions. So they are in the legal and policy making spheres. So we are talking about laws that remove the land moratorium, because the IMF, they've been heavily advocating that in Ukraine, which is in the works. It's just getting delayed right now. And the other one, it has to do with the banks, and basically making sure that the banks that were nationalized because of the mismanagement of their owners are not returned to said owners, which in our case, they are oligarchs. So that one is the problematic one, because we've hit a huge barrier when it comes to that one. But if we don't, pass that law, we will not get the IMF funds. So that's a bit of a stalemate, right? They've been discussing the need for these laws actually yesterday, in unofficial setting. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thanks a lot for that very, very comprehensive sort of overview. Do you have anything else to say by way of conclusion as we wrap up here?
Well, just, I think the situation in Ukraine is definitely not unique, and that the effects of, the economic crisis, the financial crisis, combined with coronavirus, it's going to be, ever present for quite some time. And maybe in Ukraine more than in some other countries because of the condition of the economy, the pre-existing, people can have pre-existing conditions, and our economy also had pre-existing conditions that will make us take a bigger hit. So now the thing that we as a think tank in Ukraine, and we as Ukrainians that are trying to deal with, is that the measures to help fight the outbreak don't do more damage than the outbreak itself. So hopefully we will manage that.
That's always one of those perennial dangers when it comes to crisis management.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
that's Nataliya Melnyk, director of Bendukidze Free Market Center in Ukraine. Thank you very much for your time, Nataliya.
Thank you for listening. Bye bye.